And welcome back to FoxNews.com. We are coming to you live from the Republican National Convention in Cleveland, Ohio. I am Monica Crowley. Thank you so much for joining us today. And joining me now is someone I'm a huge fan of, Eliana Johnson. She is the Washington editor for National Review. Eliana, welcome.
Thanks so much.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Are you having fun at the convention so far?
It's been a blast so far.
Very interesting dynamics.
Absolutely.
With this very unconventional Republican candidate for president.
To say the least.
We've never seen a convention like this before.
I don't think so. I think one of the most surprising things to me is that there's as much, if not more, focus on potential future nominees for president as there is on Donald Trump and everything surrounding his candidacy and the vice presidential speech and so on, but a lot of focus on Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Tom Cotton, and what they're doing around the convention, what delegations they're speaking to, and their plans for the future.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think every 4 years, every party has their convention, and we have this dynamic where, yes, you do have the nominee and the vice presidential nominee, and then you have this backstory of the future of the party. But what's fascinating this year is that Donald Trump is reinventing politics, and he's also reinventing the Republican Party. So what does that mean for the names that you just mentioned, Senators Cruz and Rubio in particular, but also Senator Cotton? You have some others like Governor Scott Walker, who withdrew this time but has a political future, may want to run for president in the future. How do these more conventional candidates now deal in the age of Donald Trump?
You know, I actually think that a lot of these conventional candidates believe that Trump is just a transitory phenomenon and that he won't actually remake the party. He's temporarily remade the party. For now, this is the party of Trump. But I think many of them believe that he's likely to lose in November, and that after that, the Republican Party will go back to its more take on its more traditional shape again, and that a 2020 primary or 2024 primary, should he lose, is much more likely to hew to a traditional course, and that they don't necessarily need to take the way Trump remade the party in terms of the media narrative into account. I think they are likely to take into account the way what Trump showed about the ideological permutations of the party into account, and people are understanding that or drawing different lessons from it, these various candidates.
You know, it's interesting. You said that they're just sort of factoring into their assumption that Donald Trump is going to lose in November. And of course, that was their assumption throughout the primary process, that he would collapse, he would implode. One of them would ultimately become the nominee. So they were wrong about him throughout this whole process. They may very well be wrong about him in November. Let's talk about the consequences if Donald Trump wins. What do these folks who have their eye on the big prize a couple of years down the road, what do they do if Donald Trump does win the White House and has remade the party as more of a populist kind of party?
I think you're seeing several of them prepare for that scenario. So somebody like Marco Rubio, who was an adamant opponent of Trump's on the campaign trail, obviously got into what he said he regretted, a fight about, you know, size of his hands and so on, has now endorsed him, has agreed to speak at the convention via video conference, was actually defending him this morning, defending Melania Trump about the alleged plagiarism of her speech, and is really going to bat for him, because should Trump move into the White House in January, these people don't want to be totally excluded from his administration. The president, I think people forget, ultimately appoints 8,000 people, and there are going to be about 200 jobs that are extremely important, and you know, these senators don't want to be completely left out of a Trump administration.
I think that's exactly right. Let's hone in on the senator. Well, Marco Rubio is going to speak tonight too. Do you expect anything sort of out of the ordinary from Rubio's speech tonight, or do you expect a full-throated endorsement of Donald Trump from Rubio?
What I think has been interesting is the people we've seen speak so far have actually, they haven't really made the case for Trump. We've seen them make the case against Hillary Clinton, and that's really what I expect from Marco Rubio tonight. And I think, you know, I've noticed Tom Cotton, who's been very careful in his speeches to the early state delegations, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. He said he predicts a victory in November, but he hasn't used Trump's name. And I think we're likely to hear something similar from Rubio tonight.
That'll be very interesting. And of course, the big sort of superstar event of the evening tonight is Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who has not yet offered an endorsement of Donald Trump. What do you expect in terms of an endorsement? Will he surprise the crowd in the country tonight?
You know, I'm told that Cruz will not endorse Donald Trump tonight, but he also won't trash him. You know, the day that he suspended his campaign, that morning, Trump had accused his father of playing a role in the John F. Kennedy assassination, and Cruz really took him to task, saying he's the most narcissistic man we've ever seen. That rhetoric will not be present. The two, Trump, when he named Mike Pence his running mate, he said Ted Cruz is a good guy. We've really seen like warmer relationships between the two of them. So I think we're likely to see Ted Cruz say some nice things about Donald Trump, not to endorse him. And I think that Ted Cruz we're seeing post his 2016 campaign is somebody who's trying to straddle the grassroots and the establishment, as opposed to planting his flag entirely with the grassroots, which and if were he doing that, he'd be doing what John Kasich is doing. He wouldn't have shown up at the convention. He would have been leading a delegate revolt on the floor, and he wasn't doing that. He's speaking at the convention. I think withholding his endorsement is one thing he's doing, you know, to make the grassroots happy, and so that he can say 2 or 3 years from now that he stood firmly against Trump. He did not offer an endorsement.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting, clever way of splitting the baby, right? I'm here at Trump's convention. I'm not fully endorsing him, but this is where the party is. This is what the American people wanted, at least in terms of the primary process on the GOP side. He is the nominee. And
as the runner-up, you know, his presence here is important, and it does project at least an image of party unity, and that surely has made Donald Trump happy and made Reince Priebus and the party establishment happy, which Ted Cruz obviously does not have a reputation of doing.
And it also serves Ted Cruz and his future interests. So let's talk a little bit about that. There's been some discussion that Ted Cruz tonight is going to try to position himself as Ronald Reagan in 1976. The ultimate outsider. Reagan was governor of California for 2 terms. He wanted the presidency, obviously. He made a run at an incumbent president, Gerald Ford, in 1976. But that he stood up in the 76 convention and positioned himself as the great conservative hope for the future. And that speech was powerful enough to carry him through the next 4 years of Jimmy Carter's presidency, to the point where in 1980 he wasn't just the nominee but won in a landslide. Will Ted Cruz give that kind of rousing, blow the lid off the convention hall tonight kind of speech as a rallying cry to conservative principles, so that he, by default, is the leader of the conservative movement, sort of in exile?
That's certainly his goal. And what Reagan succeeded in doing in 1976 was really convincing Republicans and the delegates in the convention hall in Kansas City that even though they had nominated Gerald Ford, they had chosen the wrong man, that Reagan was the guy they should have gone with. And I think that's what Cruz will try to do tonight. He did suspend his presidential campaign, but essentially what he's done since getting off the campaign trail is set up you know, a campaign apparatus that will carry him through the next 4 years. He really has not stopped campaign. He stopped campaigning publicly, but privately, this is a campaign that's going to keep going until he has an opportunity to run again.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. I think his eye is on the next 4 years. What happens if Donald Trump wins? What happens to Ted Cruz's presidential ambitions? What happens to him in the U.S. Senate over the next couple of years?
You know, I don't think that. I think Ted Cruz is really struggling with that right now, whether to get in talks with the Trump campaign. What I think is very interesting is that Ted Cruz ran a phenomenal campaign. They had a phenomenal data organization, phenomenal ad organization, and really a tremendously organized and well-run campaign, which is what Donald Trump lacks. Were these two to get together, he could really offer Trump the campaign infrastructure and organization that everybody's saying Trump doesn't have. And I'll be really interested to see what Ted Cruz and his team decide to do moving forward, and if they're going to engage in any talks, because Ted Cruz could offer Donald Trump a lot.
That is a great point in terms of infrastructure, data analytics, all the things that all of these campaigns had. Jeb Bush spent over $100 million. Ted Cruz spent $80 million, only to lose to a guy who's never done this before. We all know life ain't fair, and this is a perfect example of that. But just to bring you back to another historical example based on what you just said, Richard Nixon, when he lost in 1968 and then the governorship in 1962, spent the next 6 years calling in, serving other candidates. So he would go into governor's races, go into districts, go into states, and campaign for the Republican candidates. So when he ran in 1968, he had chips to collect. Do you think that's something that maybe Ted Cruz is thinking about as the polls now narrow and it looks like Donald Trump could actually pull the whole thing off?
You know, I think we will continue to see Cruz endorse candidates, try to get them elected. He did it in the Senate race in Colorado, endorsing Darrell Glenn, the conservative candidate in that race, the grassroots candidate. But I think Cruz is unlikely. He's positioning himself as the Reagan of '76 rather than the Nixon of '68, who endorsed Goldwater and campaigned for him. There was a great Bloomberg News article about this, and people forget that Nixon, unlike George Romney, endorsed Goldwater, campaigned very hard for him, and did exactly as you said, worked very hard for the Republican nominee and was a team player. I just don't think that's really who Ted Cruz is, and I don't think he's going to try to be somebody he's not.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch all of them navigate the waters now newly created by Donald Trump's candidacy. Eliana Johnson of National Review, thank you so much for being here. A pleasure. I am Monica Crowley, FoxNews.com. Keep it right here for our continuing coverage of the Republican National Convention right here, Fox News and FoxNews.com.